can our universities stake their role in this kind of world so that we're much more resilient?
Universities are deemed important not only in terms of production of knowledge but also in terms of essentially power.
Why our universities are under threat? They are. We know that, right, Elias? I mean, politicians, if they don't like what we're saying, they feel more free to attack us and our students.
I'm not saying we need to bring politics out of the university, but I do think that universities need to resist, and to resist in terms of what is the core business.
Elias, we've known each other for a long, long time, and I think we've always felt that we're a bit different, right? Because you're more in the ivory tower working with data and all of that, and I tend to be more a scholar activist, an academic activist, you know, very engaged in the public sphere, with citizens and all of that. And you know what, the other day someone took it a bit of as an insult to me, calling me a scholar-activist. Scholar-activism.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it means in a negative way that you are indeed a scholar who, instead of doing the hard work of data and all that, or even advice to the most powerful people, you go out there and just get involved in democratic processes and assemblies and, you know,
right.
protest, and you're an activist, or you defend a judge, or you do all these kinds of things that are literally activists, but you use your knowledge as a scholar to do it perhaps better or in a different way.
Right.
And some people think it's good, like I think it's good, but those who called me scholar-activists.
Yeah, so I'm a bit torn about this. I don't know exactly how to think about it. One thing that you do learn when you work with data is that it's extremely difficult to make any strong claims about the world, and about especially normative claims about how the world should be. Precisely because most of the times data surprises you, or is extremely blurry, or is extremely, it makes it much more difficult to draw, let's say, firm conclusions. And it depends on what degree of uncertainty we want to attach to any policy or other proposals we want to make. How much are we willing to suggest things as academics, especially within the policy, let's say, world, things that will have make proposals that might have actual consequences for real life, knowing that maybe we are wrong.
But if you're going to convince or some policymaker or actors in the world that, you know, what you're saying is important and interesting, don't you also need to kind of tell a story, be not just analytical, but also, you know, affective, relate to their lives, and relate to the life of people around them? I mean, is it all about data?
You see, it's a very good point. Back in the day, when I was still listening to music properly, but now I don't anymore,
that's a mistake.
I know, but it's also life, I guess. I think there is even a paper that shows that after 34 you stop following music. But when I used to follow music, I had, a particular, let's say, preference for electronic music. And then I realized that working with data is similar to this. In other words, a DJ will never become Rolling Stones, will never arrive at the level of public acknowledgement of the type that you would get if you do the type of work that you do, or the type of work that others do, which is work that generates concepts and produces knowledge through this concept formation that then goes and becomes an object of debate in the public sphere.
You know, it's funny you say produces knowledge, because the older I get, the more I teach, the more I'm involved in the world, the more I think of my work as kind of, yes, ambitious in the sense of transformative, the less I think that I produce knowledge. I think I co-produce knowledge with students, with citizens, with representatives, with civil servants. I think that knowledge, I don't want to be the expert. I want to be, I believe in life as expertise, as experience as expertise, to combine, yes, some analytical with experiential. So these days, for instance, I'm involved in thinking about how we can save pollinators, biodiversity, big issues. There's just one element of, but as we discuss it in an assembly or with students, we need to experience what they are, what they do together, these pollinators, as well as understand the numbers and the figures of how they are the loss of diversity. So to me, all of this is intertwined, and epistemic hierarchies are problematic. I'm on the top, and then I translate what I have, because in fact, knowledge is a social contract. You know, we all produce it together.
True.
In a kind of big map of knowledge. And if we as academics posit ourselves on the top of the tower, ivory or not, isn't that a problem?
I agree completely on that. I completely agree that there should be no ivory tower, because there shouldn't be no tower, because there shouldn't be no hierarchy. We need everything. I know this sounds as a phrase one would say in a job interview, but I do really, since we are not in a job interview.
You don't need a job interview
Exactly.
anymore,
Well, not yet. But in any case, I do believe that we do need everything. We really need everything. Now, that being said, I have doubts as to how much one should really bring in passion, should bring in sentiments, emotions from themselves or others in order to produce knowledge. Let me give you an example. I think the example is very extreme, but since you are a co-Greek, you will understand. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, whatever that was, we had the National Celebration Day. Why? Because we had the war, and that was victorious against Italy. Who is the military officer that has been in all over cities with his name in the streets? Davakis. Who was Davakis? A very mediocre lieutenant or whatever military officer he was, who lost the battles. Who won the battles? Another lieutenant that no one discusses. Why? Because that person ended up becoming minister in the so-called government that was the puppet government of the Nazi regime. In other words, if what your target here is doing efficiency in the military camp, potentially you can go with someone who is otherwise extremely problematic personality, but knows how to do the job, vis-a-vis someone who is otherwise full of passion, patriotism in this case, and has traits that are very important in general, but doesn't do the job. Now, does that mean that we should only leave things to the experts? Obviously not.
Well, and here you are talking about two alternative leaders or people in charge who had the lever of power. And in fact, what we're really asking when we talk about knowledge and who produces it is who has knowledge power. We all know, that's not because we're a university, that knowledge is power in its way, not just symbolic power. We can influence the world at our small level, right? But if knowledge is power, I dream of a world where we democratize knowledge in all sorts of ways, so we don't need to compare these two very prominent, visible people on the green scene, probably neither of which I would elect. So what I'd rather think about is whether in our world where we need to do all this long-term thinking, forecasting, trends, some of it is quantitative actually, some of it is storytelling, some of it is imagination, some of it is patterns. But in all cases, I think the citizens of the world, and in Europe and here in Italy, ought to engage in a very democratic way, thinking about scenarios and putting analysis, experience, imagination together, so that at schools, in universities, in neighborhoods, in the workplace, everywhere, we all together become societies that know how to project knowledge in the future. That would be an amazing moment. And I would add, Elias, that there's a lot of fields, probably not ours of political science, but whether you're migration, environment, health, which do action research. And when you do action research, you're a researcher working with people in their lives, and you interact with how they're in the world. It's knowledge with the people, for the people, by the people, and yet you are with them. You're also a citizen, but you have a bit of distance, and you analyze this, right? But with citizens, and they in turn engage with knowledge to better interact with this world where we need to project in the future. So,
I think it's a very novel and a very, I think, And thinking about this, one cannot but wish that this works the way you describe it, and actually it would be it would be fantastic. What I do think, however, is a bit of a problem is that there are 2 points there that I think are quite elusive. The first one is the absence of hierarchy by going into this much more, let's call it bottom-up or quasi-bottom-up or seemingly bottom-up process, which there are still hierarchies. And why are there hierarchies? Because there is this other elusive component, I think, which is that unfortunately or fortunately, research or production of knowledge comes with some criteria in order to be able to say what is and what is not knowledge, and that these criteria generate some distinctions on the basis of the skills one has in order to meet this criteria. Now, I'm not saying again that we should go back to the ivory tower, but I do think that there is some room for efficiency to be put into the table so that people can do or occupy themselves with what they can do best. And I'm not saying that, again, we should we should sort of isolate ourselves from others in terms of and simply partition tasks between researchers, scientists, and society. However, I do think that some structure that will build in, unfortunately, some hierarchy is pretty much unavoidable, which makes for me unlikely to see how the benefits of your approach that you are discussing in terms of participation outweigh the potential cost in the actual production of knowledge.
Whoa, maybe, I mean, Elias, it's hard to disagree that, in some ways what you're saying is there should be a division of labor. Some of us do one thing, others do it in another way. Even our own selves, on Mondays we might do it this way, on Thursday in a different way, and that if we start, we're also risking to open the door to, fake news or anything goes, relativism, whatever you say, then we're almost in the world of social media, and we don't really think that the university should reproduce anything goes, right? So I'm with you, and in fact, I was wondering what you meant by criteria, because listening to you, I'm thinking, well, okay, we just have, at this moment in time in our lives as scholars, maybe right now, my criterion is to how we can reinvent planetary politics, European politics. How can we democratize politics? I'm involved in democratic innovations. I'm involved in citizen assembly. I like to do, theater of the oppressed or legislative theater with all these citizens who will address some difficult questions like how you tackle hatred or how you tackle crisis democratically, or how can we do something about biodiversity, right? So I don't want to put them in a classroom. When I engage democratically, this is not and even a class, then that boomerangs in the way I like to teach, which is also, participatory. But it's because probably my criterion right now is how does this enhance the democratic life of our world? Because I think we need the democratic life.
I completely agree with you, and I think that what you try to do is extremely difficult and extremely, ambitious. In other words, you want to become an equivalent to what we call experimental trials in medicine, but do that with institutions. Doctors try through experiments to fix diseases for people. They have their own way that can be either placebo, null, or positive, oftentimes, maybe sometimes it can backlash. In your case, you want to do this with institutions. And doing that with institutions is extremely hard because we cannot have randomized trials for a long run precisely because of the potential uncertainty and the potential negative repercussions it might have.
It's really a very cool metaphor you're using, Ilya, because we can think of the body politics.
Exactly.
So we have the doctors and we have trials, and our body politics has quite a lot of, if not disease, problems, pathologies.
Exactly.
And how do we kill the virus or try to make it much less lethal in democracies where people are highly disillusioned, even angry, reject the system in various ways. And you as a very good social scientist would want to have trials, randomized trials. We have randomly selected citizens, and that's one thing, that we have randomness. We're trying to do this scientifically so that they represent society, and then we kind of can put them in different contexts and put us with them in different contexts. That becomes a bit like a randomized trial and saying, well, how does the body politics react? Do you like that?
I do like that. The problem is that the treatment is not the individuals, the treatment is institutions in your case, and we cannot randomize courts, we cannot randomize the European Commission, we cannot randomize the European Parliament, unfortunately. And that's why what you try to do, I find this an excellent device in order to get there, which is, let's try to find ways to mimic that, let's try to find ways to do that at a lower scale, see how it goes, work through trial and error, and then bring on some advice for the large scale.
Maybe, that's our next collaborative project.
Exactly.
How do you randomize institutions and the peoples within them?
Exactly.
How about that?
That would be
Shall
fantastic.
we do this?
Exactly. Thank you.
So, I'm really glad we have a research project together
Exactly,
for the next few years.
Exactly.
But in a way, that relates to another element of the conversation that we keep on having, which is why our universities are under threat. They are, we know that, right, Elias? I mean, politicians, if they don't like what we're saying, they feel more free to attack us and our students, in part because there's so much noise out there, everywhere. Information at the tip of your fingers, AI and other, which is great in some ways. Maybe that's another way to democratize knowledge. But then we need to rethink very much how can our universities stake their role in the world, in this kind of world, so that we're much more resilient when we're attacked now in 2025.
I completely agree, and I think it goes back to the discussion about the ivory tower in a way. We don't want to be an ivory tower precisely because there is so much pressure outside this tower in terms of politicians, money, technology changing that comes to the university, affects the university, relates to the university. Universities are deemed important not only in terms of production of knowledge, but also in terms of imposition of prevalent norms and generally rules of life in terms of, and essentially power. And as a result, you do have more and more attempts for interventions in essentially, let's say, our work. That being said, I do believe that, again, there is some sort of non-monotonicity, I don't know how to put it, but some sort of elasticity in terms of how much we need and we have to react to these developments. We definitely need to bring in insights from the outside world. We definitely need to think about how we can then bring it back to the society. But I fundamentally believe that the core business, which is production of knowledge, remains through different paths, but remains relatively intact and needs to do so. I'm not saying we need to bring politics out of the university. I'm not saying we need to do any of this, but I do think that universities need to resist, and to resist in terms of what is the core business.
Core business, and every one of us has a different core business, really. I mean, we need to be pluralists. Sometimes we hear notions that we should all do this or that, or all become think tankers or policymakers, or all stick to absolute theory. No, we are individuals in all our plurality, and with all sorts of relationships to politics and policy and polity. There are three worlds out there. Yes, policy, because here we are at the EUI, where we do talk to policymakers in the EU, but also beyond. But not all of our colleagues. I mean, that's not so much your business. But you Ilya, you think about polity. What's the glue? What keeps people together, and with their memory of war and all sorts of things. And then you have politics in the middle of all this, and not everybody's inclined to do politics. But if you do, but some of us tend to increasingly kind of their sense of civic, who they are, who we are civically versus academically, at least has some sort of overlap. We want to serve society with our knowledge, but sometimes we may do it clumsily, sometimes we may endanger others by doing it. I think that's why I was attacked at some point as a scholar-activist, you know,
right,
because it's not necessarily good.
I understand, and I very much agree with you in the sense that we do not need to have one voice for everything, right? We are not here to agree on everything and to create one institutional voice for every political matter outside in the world. That being said, I do think we need to have our eyes open and try to see what's going on out there without being enclosed in our ivory towers. So we have to care, but we have to care in the way we do or in the way we want to do. And again, not everyone has to do everything. There is some division of labor that I think will have efficiency gains. And I do believe that precisely because of the times that we live in, this period, it is good to have in mind that what our key business is, what our key role is, and how we can, in that respect, help in sort of addressing the challenges of our times.
I'm with you. We're both pluralists,
Exactly.
academic pluralists.